Thank you. How do you come to a decision about what is the value of an idea? There's any number of ways that we could talk about this, but this is America, so we're going to start out by talking about how much you can get for it, right? That's how we're going to talk about value. So the history of our country in talking about the value of an idea goes all the way back to the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution defines all the powers of Congress, and it's a fairly long list. But one thing that was stuck in there pretty intentionally was this clause that says that we are going to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times to the authors and inventors the exclusive right to use their stuff. If you want to use my idea, you have to pay me for it. Now, how much? What's the exchange? That's how we've talked about value for a very, very long time. How long we talk about a limited time has actually changed. The Constitution was approved in 1789. 1790, Congress got to work. First law that they put together about copyright, intellectual protections, patents, says on the copyright front, let's start with 14 years. You can have exclusive rights to the use of this thing for 14 years. After that, if you choose to not renew your right, it expires into the public domain, and then everybody else gets a chance to take a shot at that value. If, on the other hand, at the end of 14 years, you're still around, you still think it's valuable, you can apply for an extension. So 28 years works fine. We go along for the first 100 years of our country, and eventually somebody decides, that's not quite the right number anymore. We should think about this again. And we go to 28 years with the potential of a 28-year extension if you're still around and you want to file for it and it works for you. And this goes on until 1976, when we've decided 28 years by no means is enough. And we have to lock down that intellectual property protection in the copyright law for the entire life of that author, however long that happens to be, and throw another 50 years on the end of it. That's what we're going to be stuck with now. Here's how long an idea has to be protected so that that person has had the incentive to create something of value. That was 1976. In 1998, we came back at it again and decided that being dead for 50 years wasn't nearly enough. We got to have you dead for 75. Or if now we've got to take into consideration corporate authorship. What happens if you didn't actually come up with this idea, but somebody paid you to create a copyrighted work? Well, that's 120 years before the public gets their shot at that value. So the world has changed pretty substantially in the last 30, 40 years about what is the value of intellectual property. Patents, trademarks are a little bit different, but let's talk a little bit more again about copyright as a good example here of how do we squeeze some extra value out of an idea. Nonprofits came up with a 21st century mechanism to say, what, it's great if you have the ability to retain your right to copy, but what if you wanted people to really have access to that under certain circumstances and you didn't want to negotiate it on a case-by-case basis? What if you could create a set of licenses that sort of gave blanket permission to share an idea under certain circumstances? So in fact, the Creative Commons organization put together just that. A set of predefined licenses that you can pick to protect your work in some circumstances, but give blanket permission for other types of licenses in different circumstances. So there's any number of combinations of things that you can pick. The most basic one in the upper left corner here is just the attribution license. You're allowed to use my idea as long as you tell people that it came from me first. Go ahead and change it, transmute it, add to it, make it new, but tell people that I started it, and then if people want to know about the original idea, they can come find me. Or the share-alike license that is up here that we're talking about, which says, I am going to free my work into society, let everybody else use it under the condition that any derivative work that you put together based on my stuff, you also share. We're back to kindergarten. If you're not going to share, I'm not going to share, right? So we've got this opportunity to put together any number of combinations of different licenses like this to have a new way of thinking about what intellectual property protection could look like, at least in the copyright world. All of the videos we've seen today at this TEDx event and all the other TED videos are governed under a Creative Commons license, and it's available on the website to see that they've got an attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives license. So as long as you are not trying to make extra money off of this thing, as long as you are attributing who it came from, and as long as you're not trying to take somebody else's idea and make a derivation of it on your own without their permission, you're good to go. Distribute it, share it, get other people thinking about it, get other people excited about it. It's really fantastic that there's all these different ways that we can think about the value of an idea and how to move that forward. So as we change the restriction of an idea, as we say, we've got one mechanism that we can do this, which is to lock it down under traditional copyright and charge anybody that wants to use it whatever fees we feel are reasonable. We can lock it down that way, or we can choose to be more open about it. And what happens to the use of an idea then? What happens if we decide that we're going to make it more widely available? Well, the adoption curve is a really interesting way to see the impact of the power of an idea when it doesn't have to have the same limited restrictions about how much you pay for it. I want to go through an example about an adoption curve using e-reader technologies as a way of thinking about this. There's actually really current, very interesting information about this that I can't share with you because there's a $5,000 premium on actually being able to access that information. And I'm not going to pay them $5,000 for it. So I'm going to go back a couple years, use their old data that is available that I don't have to pay for. But if I had access to their cool stuff, we'd probably have something even neater to talk about. But let's talk about Forrester Research projecting the use of e-readers a few years back. And they were saying, if we could get these things to $199 price point, we could sell 3.5 million of these units, we bet. Turns out in the real world we exceeded that number. But their projections before there was that 199 e-reader was we could get 3.5 million of these things sold if we could get it down to that. What happens if we could bring that same technology to people but at $99? What's the adoption curve look like then? 11.5 million units instead of 3.5 million units sold. So if we do the quick math, we drop that price by 50%, we can actually increase usage 328%. The world picks up things that are less expensive and uses them when possible. A 61% increase in revenue, by the way. Now, in the case of things like e-readers, you've got the actual hardware cost to deal with, and there are limitations about that in the worlds of patents and in some other things. But in terms of an idea, how much you charge for it and how free you make it directly impacts how many people are going to use it. And it doesn't cost you anything to make that decision. So let's say I've got a great idea, and I'm going to license it out for, $5,000, let's say. And only 100 people in the world think that that idea is actually worth paying $5,000 for. So I've made my tidy sum and I feel great. On the other hand, what if I had that same idea and I thought, I don't really need the $5,000. What I need is for everybody else to hear about this. This is a fantastic idea. It's going to spark innovation. New jobs are going to be created. People are going to be thrilled about this thing. I got to get it out in the world. But I don't want the people that grab it to just hunker down and not have it available to anybody else. I'm going to make it available on a share-alike license for them. So if I had 100 people that wanted to pay me $5,000 for it, and I put this other restriction on it to say you can have it for free, but you have to share what you come up with, maybe only 50 people take advantage of that, just for example. Could be that there's more, could be that there's less, but let's say it's 50. It's half as many people. But that share-alike license is enforced on everything that they have done as a derivative work. Now 25 more people are going to be able to take advantage of that and distribute their work. 10 people of each one of those 25 have gone up. And instead of 100 people trying to build value out of an idea, we now have 12,500 users that are out there deploying new ways of thinking about things because one person made one decision to share their idea differently. I work for a nonprofit organization, and we like to think about value in more ways than just money. So we have mission as part of what we do. We're incorporated not just to make some money to pay the bills, that's part of what we do, have to have that too, but we also have to talk about what's our impact in the world. Are we getting the word out there? Are we doing things? And we have a little matrix that we put together when we talk about mission impact that looks at does it make money and does it accomplish mission in the world? And things that don't make very much money and that don't accomplish very much mission in the world are sort of a low priority for what we do. It's not particularly important. If we have time, maybe we'll get to it. But generally speaking, it's at the bottom of the list. But the other quadrant away from that one is things that actually earn us some money. People are willing to pay us for that stuff, and it accomplishes great things in the world. That's our biggest priority. We got to go do those things. It pays the bills, and it makes change. This is fantastic. Let's go do more of that. If that was all we had, to do, of course, we would do nothing but it. But there are other things too. This lower quadrant here talks about the idea of some things are actually things people will really pay for, even though it doesn't accomplish much of a mission. Okay, we can still use the cash. So absolutely, let's put those things on the table and see what we can do to help improve our place in the world. And if we do that, we can take the money that we've earned from that lower quadrant and move it up into this other area of really high mission work that just doesn't make any money. So that's our open source priority. That's the stuff where we can say those ideas that we really can't monetize anyway are things that we could really send out into the world and make a huge difference of, and we'll use some of these other things that we do to subsidize the cost of that. Great. Works in the nonprofit sector. How do we then talk about the fact that we've got value we've brought into the world? Because most of us think about value in terms of dollars. Well, this isn't the first time the nonprofit sector has had to struggle with this question. We have something we call in-kind contributions to nonprofit organizations, where people give gifts of time or people give gifts of resources, and they don't actually give us money, but they give us things that sort of equate to value. And for a long time, nonprofits struggled with how do we tell the story of what our value is when some of this stuff doesn't come in a donation from a foundation. Some of it comes in differently. Well, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which just rolls off the tongue, just so lovely, is an organization that helps decide what are our accounting standards. Everybody has to play in the same playbook, right? Accounting standards should be such that if you're looking at one statement, it makes sense and you know what it means. They thought, boy, nonprofits have this little weird thing here, and we're going to issue some guidance around it. We'll call it our FASB Bulletin number 116, because that's got a singing name to it too. And we'll tell people it's okay to account for something that's not cash by talking about it in terms of money anyway, and adding some value to it. So here's a little make-up budget that I have for a fictional organization that talks about income and expenses for this group. And there's traditional individual contributions and corporate donations and all that good stuff. But in here, there's an income line for in-kind contributions. Somebody gave us a value of time, somebody gave us a value of gifts, and we're going to go ahead and use that. But it really wasn't a financial transaction. So we record on the expense side of this thing the exact same dollar amount in expenses. And it washes out to zero, so really there's no dollar impact on the bottom line for this organization, but there is a mission impact. We have $25,000 more worth of stuff happening in the world because people gave it to us. What if we did the same thing with intellectual property and used this mechanism to account for value? So if we talk about intellectual property value creation as something that I can get money from, right? I've invented this great idea, I have this patented process, I have whatever, and instead of locking it down and charging people for it, I'm going to release it into the world at no cost. I've lost the money that I could have retained. I have a negative income line of $30,000 here. I just lost 30 grand. Okay, that wasn't necessarily the strongest financial statement I've ever seen, but I've also exploded the value of the thing I've done, if I've done it right. By freeing it out there, by telling people that this is yours to build upon, now I've reduced my operating expenses because I don't have to hire people to go sell my intellectual property. I don't have to hire the lawyers to guard the intellectual property. I don't have to do any of that work. I've lost $30,000 worth of expense. Lost $30,000 worth of income, but I've lost $30,000 worth of expense. Nets to zero. Tells the same story. And that's what I think is so exciting about these ideas of if we talk about value in terms of money and bring it into this world too, now I can go out to contributors that support what I do and say, you know what? We made this really cool decision to let somebody else build on the value of our idea. And we lost money as a result of it. We expanded our mission, we did really cool stuff, but we lost some money. So let me show you this statement and let me ask you, is that worth your support? Would you add your contributions to this to make up that difference? We could take the same sort of notions into the for-profit and government sectors. We could tell them if you decide to release your intellectual property protection on something, you can recognize a loss. And maybe for your accounting system, that actually isn't such a bad idea. We get people that buy low-income housing tax credits all the time because it shields their profits. This is the same kind of notion. If you contribute something of value into the world and recognize that loss, go ahead and reduce the burden that you've had. I think that if we can take a look at the value of an idea, translate it a little bit into money, but more importantly, help us set it free, we're really going to expand all of our opportunities. And thanks very much for your time.